I thought I'd introduce the panel first. Sitting over here in the center, Alfio Annabellini.
Nice, well done.
Good, thank you.
Done.
I practiced in front of a mirror. I know, I just realized there's some things in here I don't really know, but I do know that you're working at Metalworks, teaching at Metalworks in Seneca College in the education front. I'm just going to read this quickly. Alfio is an accomplished recording engineer in the Canadian music industry. He has worked with many multi-platinum artists, including Tea Party, Our Lady Peace. It goes on. I'm going to keep the credit list down, if you don't mind, guys, too much, because it really does go on. That's right. He also teaches at Seneca Independent Music Production Program and also works as a freelance recording engineer and mixer.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll do this tight. That's good. Riley Bell, over here. Started at Revolution Recording a week after graduating from an audio engineering diploma at Metalworks Institute. Did you teach him?
Yeah, I did.
All right. Yeah. His first engineering credit was from early 2013 on Protest the Heroes Volition. It goes on. We know that Riley has done Daniel Caesar's record, which to huge acclaim. So we already give him props for that. Okay, which debuted #1 on many R&B charts around the world. So again, I'm just going to keep the credits down because that's really where that's good. Jason Dufour over here. You grew up in Windsor too? Huh, what do you know? What are the chances, right? Growing up in Windsor, Jason has always been a huge music fan at heart. Graduated from the audio engineer program at OEART in London. Jason moved to Toronto to gain experience as assistant engineer at Phase 1, where I met him. Later hired as staff engineer at Revolution Recording, where I saw him again. Jason's gone independent and is a recent winner of Recording Engineer Award, Juno Award. There's a lot of Juno Awards up here. He has mixed consecutive singles for July Talk and recently signed with Joe D'Ambrosio Management, which is a management firm out of New York, right? All right, Glenn over there, also from Windsor. I love this one. Glenn Fricker never stops making things. By day, he sweats it out on the line, working in manufacturing. When his shift lets out, he heads to his home sound studio where he records, mixes, and masters music for heavy metal bands. He says years of dealing with musicians not dedicated to the craft inspired to make his first YouTube video, How to Get Your Band Ready for the Studio. 5 years later, is this still accurate? It's probably a much bigger number than it is now, or something like that. But this is what I found. There's 124,000 subscribers to Spectre Sound Studios YouTube channel, which is
280,000.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. This has to be old and out of date. Yeah, that's it. Thanks for updating that. Hayward Parrott, right over here. At the age of 19, Hayward began his recording engineering career at RCA Records, Toronto, and just 7 short years later found himself as the chief engineer for the legendary recording studio Manta Sounds. And not all of you realize that, but there used to be other big studios in town. And Manta and RCA, which, as it says here, in 1985, returned to RCA, which became McClear Place as vice president general manager. Next, he started Solar Audio. That was in Halifax. That's right. Combining all his creative and technical talents. There's another one after that which isn't in here. What's the
St. Cecilia.
St. Cecilia. Church. Yeah, that's right. He has lots of gold and platinum records, number of awards and nominations. His skills fully reflect a reputation that comes only from hard work and dedication to his craft, and that's very true. So Hayward is, when I started, you were already a happening thing. I'm not sure that's great
for
me.
But yeah,
I'm sorry about that, but that's just
that's
the way
okay.
it goes. All right. Okay, and I'm Jeff Walford. Okay, so that's our panel. The question I have. All right. For some of us, technology has been disruptive. In other words, we started one way and things completely changed. We had to learn a new way of doing things. For others, the younger crowd mostly, but it's just the way things are done. There's no before or after, particularly at that point in time. Depending on when you came in, things have been transitional. Some of us were all analog when we started and started converting to digital at some point in time. Some of us started digital and are now going back to analog, so transitions happen all the time, really, and that sort of thing. Modern music evolves to adapt paradigms and methods made possible by new technologies. And I do see the significant desire for a loaded word, authenticity, that is out there, which seems to be driving some direction back to an older method of doing things, or a previous method of doing things, or older technology, and so on, because there's a perception of authenticity there, which is interesting because the digital thing lets us do something you couldn't possibly do, and now people are more interested in only doing what you can possibly do to some extent with a variation. So it's all very interesting. It's going on for time. I'm a firm believer that the technology drives the music. Some people completely believe the other way. I think that there was no piano music until there was a piano, basically. And another thing I believe, this is very much my opinion, that the car radio is pretty much responsible for the way pop music sounds to some extent, given where you had to listen, and if it didn't work on the car radio, it wasn't going to work anywhere. But it's come out of the car radio, and yet we still have that ethic that we're working with. All right, and so we have this generation-spanning panel here, and I want to ask you guys, how have you adapted to the evolution of recording technology, wherever you came in on the train, if you adapted at all? And what did you perceive, what do you perceive the job of the recording engineer will be going forward? That's my question. So, Hayward, do you want to start this? Do you mind? You had something.
I was going to read an article that I wrote, I think about 8 years ago for Professional Sound magazine, but battery's gone. No, that's okay.
Okay.
I mean, it's there. I think you could probably get it in the archives or whatever.
Okay.
But basically, it was.
Hey,
I guess they wanted how audio transferred from analog to digital.
Yeah, I'm gonna get you.
And yeah, thanks, Jeff.
Yeah.
So the transition of actually analog audio to digital and stuff like that. And I guess they came to me because I think next June it'll be 50 years.
All right.
I'll have a 50.
Congratulations.
If I'm still doing it, which, well, I've got bookings right through there, so hopefully I'm still doing it. So I wrote this article, basically, when I started at RCA at 19 or whatever. There was 2 studios, 2 recording studios, 2 mastering rooms, and a dubbing room, which is where I started. In the dubbing room, sweeping the floor and making these high-speed one-on-one. I think it was probably the first offline bounce in analog form, because the machines ran at 60 IPS and 30 IPS.
Oh, right.
So we run 15 IPS masters and make 7.5 dubs, but you had to sit there and make sure you spun them, otherwise you had tape everywhere when you fired these things up.
Right.
So that was my first look at things, and the main studio, Studio A, had, it was an old 350 Ampex 3-track machine on half-inch tape.
Silver?
The silver, the big metal casket.
Yeah.
But on top of it, they'd actually grabbed another set of 350 electronics and just plunked it on top and wired it in for our first 4-track.
Right.
So it didn't last too long. Then we had our first Scully 1-inch 8-track.
Ah, the Scully.
Yeah.
But one of the things you guys didn't know about the Scullys when they started.
If
if you edited something from the beginning of the tape to something at the end of the tape, the pitch was different.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we had lots of fun times back then. So going through that transition, I mean, that's probably as early as you can get without going to wax, I guess. I spent a couple of years, 2-3 years, learning to be a mastering engineer. Sucked at it, but it was fun, great ear training. And then I graduated into the studio, and at that point, I think we'd taken the first MM 1000 16-track machine.
Oh, yeah, right.
Ampex.
So we were now in I'd like to be clear about the mastering. You were mastering to?
Oh, I was just learning from Fred Burchill and from Alan Moy.
Yes, but
bless both their souls.
You were mastering at that point meant going from tape to?
Tape to, right to, I think there was a, what was it? There was a VMS 80, a Neumann lathe in the big room.
Yeah, so we're talking vinyl mastering.
Yeah, vinyl, sorry, making the stampers, the
right.
original mothers and stuff. So once again, that was from 1/4 inch. Most of those tapes then, mastering engineers are few and far between, except in New York and whatever with Bob Ludwig and guys like that. But back then it was mainly pre-production masters. So the original master had been done already with a mastering engineer somewhere. So they did these releases, and because it was RCA.
Right, so you're doing the Canadian version.
Well, Canadian and sometimes for the U.S. But basically you put it on, you line it up, and you cut the disc.
Right.
You know, so you weren't really messing around with things or whatever.
This was sort of this was sort of one of the first distribution ideas that people is that in order to sell a record in Canada, it had to be made in Canada, or it came across as an import.
Exactly.
Right, so they take the very same record that was made somewhere else,
Yeah.
send you the EQ'd version of
Oh,
it.
these were the
and
EQ'd masters
that's
from
right.
New York
You'd
or
make a
from
new
Europe.
master of
Yeah.
it and just that had to be done in order for it to sell
And then it
at a
was shipped
particular
off
price.
to Smith
Yeah.
Falls, the
Yeah.
pressing plant, which were single pressing plants back in
Oh,
those
yeah.
days. Anyway, we could go on forever on
Yeah.
this thing, the transition. So I quickly went through all that at RCA and learned under George Semke and Mark Smith and Phil Sheridan. Unfortunately, Phil and George are both gone now.
That's correct.
But they've left a heck of a legacy and
They have.
people they've trained and whatever. So then I guess by the time it was 1975, I guess I was chief engineer at that point of RCA because George had gone to form phase one and Mark had left to go to LA and
Right.
went on to do all kinds of huge feature films and stuff as
Yep.
the music mixer. So in 76 I left and went to Manta. And that was another big transition because now it was 24 track and it was all Studer machines and we had a Neve 8068 console, you know. So it's a great place. And I think at one point, not bragging, but Manta was probably the first call of most of the studios in Canada,
Yeah.
you know. So that lasted almost 10 years. And it was funny because I remember Andy, when I actually, I was on him for the last 2 years that I was there. I was on him because I wanted him to put an SSL console in. And because the Neve was getting a little long in the tooth, and he said, no, I've got Duke Street Records going, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of money. So we battled for at least 2 years. And then I was mastering, I think, one weekend over at McClear, and with Peter Norman, and Bob was there, Bob Richards, who was the owner, who I incidentally hired when I was at RCA before I left. I was maintenance engineer. But anyways, I ran into him and I sort of just said, so when are you going to put an SSL in here? Well, he went white. And basically, he just said, who told you or whatever? He just gotten back from England. Where he
Oh, I
ordered it.
see.
Yeah, and he was just, and I said, I just threw a line out, Bob, and I said, you're biting. And I said, I was just fishing. So anyways, he said, well, it's already ordered. Would you consider coming to work here?
Right.
And I said, well, let me think about it. So that was on the Saturday. So Monday, I marched up to Andy's office and said, okay, last chance. You want to put an SSL in? And he just looked at me, and I remember him saying, who's putting one in? And I said, well, you asked me no questions. I'll tell you no lies. I said, but if you're not going to put one in, I think it's been a good run. So I resigned, but it still took me 3 months to get out of bookings. I was still recording and whatever to get over to Bob's place. And then there was a good 4.5, 5 years at Bob. Put in the first SSL, and then we put in the second one, Studio 3. And then right about that time, and this is where this kind of comes in with the changes of things, most of my clients and stuff like that, Rosnick Productions and a lot of the jingle people and a lot of the producers and whatever, were starting to work at their own home studio. I mean, it was more, because the studio rates, I mean, back then we were charging in excess of $300 an hour.
Yeah.
And getting it, But I mean, back then a studio was $2-3 million to get invested in.
Right.
Your console was $1 million.
And these were purpose-built places.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean,
And
in
business
downtown
plans
Toronto, that had parking and all kinds of stuff like that. And one thing you had when you walked in the door was service.
Well, yeah, we had maintenance. I think Octopus Audio. There was at least 7 or 8 people in maintenance.
Yeah, these
And
were
just to
highly
keep
staffed
3
places,
studios.
Yeah, so it's not that, I mean, I worked there too. So
Yeah.
they were expensive, which was fun, but they also had a lot of people around working. And stuff
It
like
was.
that.
It was a
lot of
great working
service.
because that was the old, I guess, the European way of learning, the apprentice way.
Yeah.
Where we would grab 5 or 6 students from the various colleges or Fanshawe and whatever else, and you train them, and they become the next series of engineers.
Okay.
But to go back to those studios, it was, you'd be doing jingles, you'd be doing film scores, you'd be doing albums. It was just like a round-the-clock thing that you could just continually do. But if I was doing a film score, and I was with either James Horner or with Howard Shore, whoever it would be with, you've got like a 40, 50-piece orchestra. You can't afford any downtime.
Yeah.
So in other words, if the machine stops or something happens or whatever, at $300 an hour or whatever, that's a pittance compared to the fact that the orchestra went overtime.
Yeah.
So, and a couple of times that did happen, but those are some old war stories.
Yeah.
So anyways, that kind of cost to keep things going was pretty high up there.
Right.
So back to when I left Manta and stuff or when I left McClear, I was still doing freelance work because I think I'm still doing pre-records and the final in-house for the Tommy Hutter show and a bunch of other things. But all the clients were building their own little rooms, you know, and everything was MIDI and everything was whatever. So they were going to record at the major studios when they needed to, but they were finishing off most of it there. So I saw a lot of this happening, and I think that was the start of the decline a little bit. And I made a decision. I wanted out of the city, so I moved to Halifax.
Right.
And I had 17 years in Halifax, and just came back about 8 years ago or whatever, because we followed my daughters back and grandkids.
Yeah, and then the other things start to take over.
Well, then, yeah,
Life.
and I thought, well, okay, so how am I going to reinvent myself or get back in the swing of things, or do I retire?
Right.
You know, and so I moved back, but I had all this gear and stuff from 3 studios that I had out there. And, you know, I spread it around a couple of rooms, and I built this and built that. And it took a couple of years, but now, I mean, as I said, next June will be 50 years or whatever, and I got a 3-hour feature documentary that I'm just starting to work on. I just delivered 5 one-hour comedy shows for CBC, the Winnipeg Comedy Festival. That's an ongoing series. The one thing that probably, I'm doing so much post now,
Right.
and I kind of missed the music aspect.
Right.
Although I was in Revolution about 2 months back, and I cut old Frank Mills wrote this song.
Right.
So we booked an orchestra and did it live off the floor, and it was just like going back in time.
Right.
So I'll wrap it up by saying that basically I've kind of come full circle.
Yeah.
I mean, the Pro Tool systems I've had, I started probably about 12 years back, 12 or 13, when they finally got it together. And I've gone through 6 or 7 different systems. I'm now on 2018.7 or whatever, and mixing in 5.1.2.
Yeah.
So it's good to see these studios here, especially the old form of, I mean, the maintenance and the assistance and the whatever, and just the front end of those studios.
Yeah.
That hasn't been lost. And the fact
No,
that
and that's one thing to talk about. The fact is that there still seems to be as much
there's
as
a
we
need.
There's a need, and there's
resurgence.
still a system that brings assistance up through there and be a place to get experience.
The one really good thing about the fact that people wanting to go back and either do it on vinyl or go back and record it live or do whatever, and is because you have to be talented to do that too. You have to know how to play your instrument. You can't just go in and just MIDI a whole bunch of stuff, and you know. And I'm not saying it's not wrong, you know. But there's a craft that's honed with playing an instrument or being a vocalist or whatever, that over the last 10, 15 years, with Pro Tools, with all the other stuff and Cubase, and it's kind of brought a region, and once again, there's no major label support. They started going by the wayside too. So that whole breeding ground of looking for talent kind of got sidetracked.
Right, and
But
it also got vilified to some extent.
But it's now come back around, and I think there's a lot of talent that's coming up. So it's a huge resurgence that I see.
Yeah,
I mean, I'd like to be doing more music, but once again, 50 years of it.
Yeah, great. So that's a great perspective on what's gone on here. So, but what I'd like to get from somebody else is a different perspective. So we can, or something. So Riley, I think that would be a good time.
I mean, I was fortunate that I had like as traditional of an upbringing as I could have gone for someone my age. Like I started at Revolution when Jay was there, and you know, I was an intern there when I started, which is like the modern version of a T-boy, which would have been like the European.
Terrible T-boy.
Yeah, you know, which would have been the British system. And then that's how I learned. I was in the studio making coffee and cleaning the floors and whatever. And slowly started learning. Jay would, you know, every once in a while have like a second to show me stuff. And then next thing you know, if you're there 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, you start to, know some things. And I also got to work on tape. Like I did records that didn't touch the computer until we dumped the mixes down. So I got as traditional of upbringing as I could have gotten, in this day and age. And when I started, the major studios had only just come back. Like I think there was like a lull in Toronto where there was almost no major studios. And then when I just got out of school, Revolution was almost just opening. It may have been like a year or so. So I got lucky with that timing as well. That I got to come up in a big studio like that. The one thing I could say, like, the difference from that upbringing compared to like a lot of maybe my peers that are my age is that a lot of recording engineers don't, there's just like a different education. Like I think you can get by on being really good on Pro Tools and like what you do. But like a lot of these engineers that, you know, work on massive albums, go into the studio, they don't really know what's going on in the studio. Right? If that makes sense. Like, at Revolution, once again, it's pretty old school, and like Joe Dunphy taught me so much about, you know, all the inner workings. It's like I installed like a mix bus modification to our 80 series Neve, right? That's just something that, you know, most recording engineers don't need to know anymore.
Right.
So that's, you know, that's probably a huge change from like what you're saying, where, you know, back in the day, the engineers, something broke, you pull the module, take it to the back, boom, reinstall it. You know what I mean? That's a different, that's just a different
Yes,
era of recording.
we called them spares, and we did have them.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, we had tags like Anthony, who invited me to speak, also taught me so much too, always be in the back and help me fix stuff and finding, you know, figuring out what's wrong and problems. But I feel like that's not mandatory anymore. But you know, for most careers, and that's fine. It's just like a different, it's just a different era. Like, you know, there's so much that can be done with technology now that, you know, there's no right or wrong workflow, and some people just don't need to make records that way.
Right.
It's a preference, and it could be a creative decision, right? And sometimes people learn the other way by necessity, because not everyone has access to the facilities, or, you know, like requires a budget to get in there, you know. So I think a lot of people have like hacked ways to make records, you know, on shoestring budgets, which in itself creates an innovation in how you can make records out of necessity, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, that's the economic pressure.
Yeah, right.
That changes the way you can do things, and the technology seems to enable doing it for less money, and so things adapt, right? I mean, that's a kind of natural push and pull, really. That
for sure.
There, you know?
Yeah, and like, you know, it just depends on like what you're doing, right? For some things that works, and for some things that doesn't work. I think we've seen where that doesn't work, and it's, you know, it's just cheap sounding or whatever, but then there's types of music where that is totally fine, and that's kind of the sound of it.
Right.
You know?
That's really, the language changes, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, and like for me, it's like when I left the studio, it's like now I have to be able to travel with my mixes and stuff, because I'm not in the same room every day, and I can't just pull up a mix and do a recall if I'm in the studio one day and then I'm in another city the next day or something, right? So that's been like maybe the biggest transition for me, going from Revolution to freelance, is that I kind of have to be pretty adapt proof. Like I have to be able to pull up a mix at the, like any moment, kind of wherever I am.
So does that lead to sort of more, forgive me if this is a bad word, mixing in the box?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, like
there's a consistency.
Yeah, like if I'm gonna, you know, if I need something from like if I want to use something from a room that isn't mine, I will get it to tape, and then that's it. Yeah. Like that's just what it is, because it's just not practical for my projects to need to get back into the room to recall mix, which is what you had to do back in the day.
Yeah, to be clear, when Hayward was talking about SSLs, that was the really big innovation.
That was the
right, that the console was recallable. It had full automation, and it was recallable, and that made money.
So that
it made money.
Clear too, from about the 7th or 8th call studio in town to the number 1.
That's right. So it would, because I remember those, because you made money doing recalls.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is that because we appreciate? Here's one thing that's changed, and just a reflection of what you said. We have the ability to reflect on what we've done like we've never had before, which means you can do something, open it up in another room or another city or another, and in theory, it's exactly the same. So then if you want to make changes, that never used to be. No. I agree with you, it was very location specific. But just the ability to go back created a huge change. And I used to tell people I worked with, rather than spend another 5 hours now going straight, why don't you take this home? And that reflection of them listening on what they listened on, in their way, when they weren't impressed by giant speakers and stuff like that, was worth way more than going another 5 hours hacking at something and not, you know what I mean, and them not being sure, and them not even being sure what it is they're looking for. And that's it. So yet the studio made a fortune because they had to come back. We had to charge an hour or two to reset up the thing at $350 an hour. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? It was great. It was a moneymaker, that sucker.
Yeah, and I did. We did a bunch of mix sessions at Revolution where we're using everything in the room, and then the other thing that would happen is you would call it, and it's not quite the same, and then you're spending an hour or two figuring out, and then it's just the smallest thing.
There it is.
Exactly. Set up, execute, the whatever.
So, it is interesting that the recall has become super good.
Oh, it's been perfect.
Yeah, that's the thing, which just changed, right? It really changed how we operate.
Yeah,
right? Who's afraid of doing stuff now when you can just go back?
Yeah, and then, but the
client. That's a whole nother other conversation though about what people expect now.
Because the client, that was just about to say. The client knows that though. That's the problem. Oh, right? That's true. So it's like
mix 1028.
Yeah. Oh, I see. So it's not necessarily an advantage, is what you're saying.
Yeah, like I'm doing mix revisions in the airport. It's like they wouldn't be asking me to do that if they know I could. You know what I mean? So it's like.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then maybe another thing that I had to learn quickly transitioning, which is something that would have been changed now, is that when I was first mixing records, there's no budget for mastering, so I had to master the record myself, and then that changed my workflow entirely because what I was doing is now when I mix, I'm mixing at the destined volume that I want to get to, which just changes the workflow entirely, right? And now I pretty much master. I deliver all my files master pretty much. And then if they want to remaster it at Sterling Sound or something, then I'll just remove my master bus and then send that. Mm-hmm. But that was just out of necessity because there's no budget for mastering. They didn't have the $3,000 or whatever it cost to master the whole album. And so I had to.
Bob's $55 US to get in the door.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So it's just it just depends on the circumstance. I feel like is. These days, whereas back in the day, it's much more structured. It's you go in, you cut for 10 days, mix for 5, deliver mastering or whatever.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
They had
and mastering has changed, which may be something we talk about, but the function of mastering has changed. Right?
Yeah.
Whereas before, that's why I wanted to make the point with here. Mastering was about changing media before to a large extent, and now it's
vinyl. Yeah,
and now that's not really the issue, is it? Right now, it's about changing sound, which is kind of a different concept, really. I think and that sort of stuff. Okay, so we've bracketed the epoch, the era of what's gone on here and stuff like that. And now there's the various of us, I'll include myself because I'm being complimentary, in the middle, and the barely. So you guys, how have things changed? What's particularly? I want to hear from Glenn. I'm sorry too, because let's take another perspective, and then we'll come back. It'll kind of keep it moving around.
Oh, gee. Well, the musicians still suck. Hasn't changed at all. The bass players still don't practice.
Right.
They're still too cheap to buy.
I told my guys this, by the way. Bass players that I remember, studio bass players who would practice with a VU meter, watching every note to make sure it was the same volume.
Yeah, the bass players I work with, what's a VU meter?
Yeah.
Seriously. What's changed for me? I mean, the technology's kind of evolved. At the beginning of this, they were talking about transitioning from analog to digital. And, when I was at Sheridan under Jim, we were still an analog studio. And, I still got my edit all, and I remember scrubbing tape and all the thing. But when I opened my own studio, it was with a system called Digital Wings for audio from Monolithic Systems. And it was one of the very first PC-based multi-trackers, and it was really primitive. And you'd set up your mix, you'd hit play, and then it would actually render a file before you could actually play it back. There was no real
I remember that.
Anything like that. It was super primitive. And then so the technology's just evolved. And you still needed really powerful computers when we first started. Nowadays, just average garden variety laptop, you can do 72-track mix, full plugins, whatever. So the ease of technology has really come a long way. What's also changed? I think a lot of things how we used to do are kind of dying arts, like recording drums, and especially in the rock genre. 90% of the records I'm hearing these days are all just fake drums. Nobody's recording real kits anymore.
Oh, I see.
And we're not hearing the drummer anymore. And if we are hearing real drums, we're hearing a facsimile of drums. We're not hearing the drummer play. We're hearing drummer plus editing. We're hearing drummer plus samples.
Right.
That's something I really miss, is hearing a great drummer play in a rock situation. We're just not getting that at all. Same with singers. We're not hearing singers anymore. We're hearing singers plus technology. We're hearing singers messed with. We're hearing singers transmuted into something not human. And that's the honest truth. I mean, what we're hearing bullshit is what we're hearing. And let's put it this way, okay? Yeah. Auto-tuned pitch correction, that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's paint by numbers. Nobody flies all over the world to go to the Louvre to see paint by numbers. They want to go see the works of the masters.
Right.
And nobody's doing that in rock anymore. I could be wrong, but that seems to be very, very rare. In rock and pop especially, we're not getting singers pushing themselves anymore. I mean, we used to have great artists like, the Beatles and the Beach Boys and Queen, all these great, magnificent vocal harmonies and whatnot.
Well, I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
But I do wonder when people say, is that if the technology had been there, would they have used it?
Yeah. I don't know, but the thing was, we got great music.
Right.
Now we're not. The music's really suffered, I think. You asked me where we've gone with technology. Suddenly, good enough has become okay.
And I would agree to some extent. There's certainly, and especially in, I think it may be market dependent to some extent and things like that. I think that, my experience, or it's kind of like, to be honest, it's another thing you said. When people went to home studios, it doesn't mean there was a change, but one thing that did change, and one market I'm familiar with is music for picture, and especially in the TV series for a while, I did a lot of that. And that went to good enough, because it was background material largely and stuff like that,
Sure.
and you could produce it cheap, and you could do it, and who cared?
Right.
Which
and you've
was
got
a problem.
deadlines and all that. Believe me, I understand where
That's right. No, and I'm not justified, but it made economic sense to do it. So there were some markets where I think that was that was a trade-off people were willing to take. And producers, in that case it would be television and movie producers, were happy with the price reduction. Right.
Yeah, and believe me, I get it. There's like this weird vicious circle going on where it's like, shrinking budget versus studio time, all that kind of things, where you have to push a product out, and so you need to take shortcuts. So with no budget, it means you have to take shortcuts, and good enough becomes the rule of the day. So it's kind of a thing. It's like, how do we make art when nobody's going to buy it? That's my point. Is how do we put the time and effort into a great record when you can't sell it because somebody can just download it? That's the entire bottom of the music industry's fallen out. You ask me where it's gone. Here's something. When I opened up the studio, a lot of bands were like, okay, we're going to work our asses off. We're going to do a record. We're going to demo it. We're going to tour. We're going to shop it around. We're going to try and get signed. Nowadays, I just tell bands, don't even bother with record labels, because you don't need them. My friends in Rest Repose, that's Jared Dines and Ryan Bruce, they broke the top 10 on iTunes and just toured North America with 0 label support. They did it all themselves. Why? Because they're YouTubers.
Right. So the evolution here is essentially a kind of a change in distribution and getting it out there.
Oh yeah,
and I think we've seen that.
Don't need radio. You don't need labels. You don't need much music. You don't need MTV. None of that.
And yet,
you've got YouTube.
And yet, we seem to see that part of the premise of this, the preamble to this in the program, is that music companies seem to be coming back to some extent. So they may be
think there is
change.
changes. They are coming back.
They are coming, and they may be changed from sort of the development side of things to the distribution and the well, it's not exactly manufacturing, but you know what I mean. That idea of getting the stuff out there and becoming big distribution companies.
I was going to say again, you've got DistroKid. Why would you do it?
No, that's true. You can't. So then they're
put that
there
out to
for
several hundred online music
Right.
sources, Google Play, Spotify, Amazon, all those places, and without any third-party interference or taking a percentage or anything like that. You don't need any of that.
No, you don't need it, but you do have to. People have to know it exists.
Every career is
And that's where
Yeah.
YouTube comes in.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So you do have to make an effort, or somebody has to make an effort to let people know it exists.
Oh, yeah,
Whether or not you do that yourself or you hire somebody to do it, and whether you call that person you hire to do it a record company or not, that's really the business they're in, right?
Some artists really do need a lot of people managing them, otherwise nothing will happen. And
Right.
some people don't, and they can handle their affairs. You know, it's
Right.
just every career is different. There's no right or wrong.
So it's interesting. It's interesting because if we say there are no companies out there that help get the stuff out, then only a certain kind of artist will succeed, right? The one that is driven or has enough business sense
Right.
or something like that, to some extent. And that's, of course, not necessarily how it used to be, when record companies would take care of all of that, and we liked our artists incapacitated, frankly. Do you know what I mean? It was romanticized. Just think of the big rock stars. Do you know what I mean? Like you're throwing stuff out hotel windows. You didn't think that was the same guy who was planning their strategy.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? That was but we liked that. It was a romantic thing, wasn't it? It's kind of like the Bad Boy or Janis Joplin or something like that. And frankly,
Motivation.
Yeah, we like them to abuse themselves as much as possible because we bought into the whole tortured artist thing.
Well, that's the other
It's a
thing.
weird thing, but whether we romanticize that or not. But.
And that's the other thing. I mean, like over the last 20 years or so, the rock star has disappeared.
Yeah.
That's
I'm not
really
sure
a
I'm
bygone
upset
era.
with that, but
I mean,
I feel like I wouldn't say it disappears. Just think the idea of what a rock star is just
Okay.
different now. I mean, that's just my opinion.
yeah,
Well, go for it.
sure. I agree.
Yeah. So then, Jason. So you started at you started at phase one, and then moved to another studio, kind of in that way of doing it. And then from there you jumped off. So it's not unlike yours, but you kind of worked it a little longer.
Yeah, like, Riley and I have very similar backgrounds, the way we came up, and we worked at the same place, and I groomed him into a fine young man. But no, I'd like to just touch on like my career, like the last 11 years and what I've seen. The job as an engineer, a mixer, a producer in the business kind of shift a little bit, and the recording industry in general in Toronto shift a little bit. Like when I started 11 years ago, it was kind of grim, to be honest. And it was, a lot of big records were not getting made here. They were getting made in Vancouver, they were getting made in LA, New York, and Nashville, but no big records were really getting made in Toronto. And, I contemplated for a little bit. Like my first year at phase one, I was like, man, should I go move out to LA? Should I go move to Vancouver? Because I wanted experience working on big records and working on bigger projects and working with, really great producers and engineers who I can learn from. Not that I didn't work with great producers and engineers while I was at phase one, but I was just looking at all these records getting made. The 3 Days Grace was going to record in Vancouver, and all these awesome Canadian bands and artists were not recording here. And I also witnessed, like when I first started at phase one, I'd be put on projects, and a lot of times there'd be a producer, there'd be an engineer, maybe a Pro Tools editor working in the other room, and then I would be the assistant helping them out in the room. But over the first year, I saw a big shift where a lot of label projects, small labels, indie labels, or even major labels coming in and be a producer. And he's engineering, and he's doing everything. You know what I mean? So, and I kind of saw that. I was like, oh, man, like, I wanted to be an engineer, right? But I was also fascinated at mixing. Like, mixing was something I was very interested in. Even before I went to school and when I was younger, I called it tweaking. When I was recording my friends, in Windsor and stuff like that, it was my favorite aspect of it. I didn't know it was mixing until I kind of got into business. Like, oh, there's like different things. There's mixing, there's recording, there's different aspects of making records. And so I quickly, that first year being in Toronto, I'm like, okay, what I saw was a producer coming into the studio, a lot of times engineering, wearing all the hats. They always gave it to a mixer, though. It always got sent to somebody else to do the final, creative juice all over it, if you say. So I realized that early on. I'm like, oh, you know what? I should really focus on maybe getting good at mixing, because maybe that would you know, enable me to have a long career. If I get good at it, you have to be good at it, obviously. So I really focused on that. When I was working at Phase One, when I was working at Revolution, any downtime I had, I'd be in the studio mixing. I used to assist an engineer at Phase One named George Sierra, who's like an amazing mixer. So I learned a lot from him, but I would, like, you know, apply everything I learned from him during the day, and I'd stay there all night and try to be like Jordan, you know, and just bash my head against the wall. Why does it not sound like George's mixes? But yeah, so I just really developed onto that, and then what happened? I don't really. Maybe it was like towards the end of me working at Phase One, before I got hired to work at Revolution. I saw a shift happening, and I think it was around the same time when, like, you know, Drake got really big, and all his producers, a lot of them were Canadian, got really big with him, and Justin Bieber came up, and I just saw a shift in the industry. It was like, you know, people were looking at Toronto, and then all of a sudden people were working in Toronto more. And when Revolution first opened, you know, Rush came in, 3 Days Grace is making records there, like all these, and then Noble Street came online at the same time too, and people were just, and then all these other cool artists started coming up, and people were just, now I'm looking, I'm like, man, I'm happy I stayed, because it was totally different at that point. This is going, you know, this is about 5 or 6 years in, and it was just a different thing. Everybody's making records in Toronto now. You had these beautiful studios people wanted to work in. People were having songwriting sessions. People were flying in from LA to New York or work with Toronto artists. And then throughout that, you know, I still focused on the mixing thing. And you know what? I look at it as like this, like, you know, to you know, touch on the question you first asked about, like, how do you sustain a career, or where do you see it going? I look at it as like, either if you're really good at one thing, just focus on that one thing and really excel on it, and just, you know, touch as many aspects of, you know, regarding that one thing as you can. So I really was focused on mixing. I mean, I engineered a whole lot too, and I engineered some really great records, and I learned from some really great recording engineers, but it was the mixing thing that really, like, set the juices off of me. So, but I would just say, you know, there's also a lot of people who wear many hats, like Riley's a great mixer, Riley's a great engineer, producer, songwriter, and he touches on all those aspects. And I think right now is so important to have. If you can touch in a couple different fields and you're really good at them, just kill it, and be, you know, I guess just be, you know, self-absorbed and into the things that you know, can create, you know, revenue for yourself and create a career, and don't just stay, like, stagnant in one thing. Like, you know, if for instance, like, you know, the last few years I've been mixing full time, but now I'm looking at, okay, what else can I do to excite, you know, into my life, to create different revenue streams or different career things down the line. Like, I want to get into artist development now, and because there's so much great talent I see all the time, that it's like, okay, why don't I tap into this and help somebody, you know. Like, you know, the story with Riley and, you know, his team with Daniel Caesar and everything. It's such a cool thing to look at and say, and it's just like such an organic thing to see grow. And you know, it's all started here in Toronto, working with talented people who just came up together, and they all had a vision. And I look at that, I'm like, okay, like, I can, you know, why can't I do something like that? You know, it's all going back to, like, you know, just having an outlook on life and ensuring that you're not just like this the whole time. You're kind of like seeing the bigger picture, you know, and you're not just like focused on one thing. Oh, I want to be a Pro Tools editor, but yeah, but maybe you can be something else, like an engineer, or maybe, I don't know, maybe you can go and record voiceovers too, and there's nothing wrong with that, you know. There's so many, like, aspects that you can touch on, you know, especially this, you know, going back to what Hayward was talking about, just like people leaving studios and working in their own rooms. Like, that's such a big thing now. Like, how people are just out doing their own thing, and you know, anything that you can do to you know, just solidify yourself as a working professional in the industry, right?
Right. Because, I mean, you don't know where things are going to go.
You never know. No, it's always changing. And you know, the whole thing with mixing in the box, like, when I learned mixing on consoles. You know, I was always working at the studio. I was working on indie projects. Why am I going to mix on the box when I can use a real 1176? Right. Why? You know, no, I liked doing that. But when I left the studio, I had to make a decision. I'm like, hey, I need to mix in the box, because I'm like, oh, I'll go book out the room. And then you realize nobody wants to pay for the room.
Right.
So it's like, okay, I had to learn quickly how to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's either work or don't. I mean,
Yeah,
it's-
you're either working or you're not working, right?
Yeah,
If,
yeah.
You know, the whole thing of just how people expect, especially with mixing, expecting recalls, like, you know, oh, turn the vocal up, turn the vocal down, turn the vocal up, turn this, you know, I mean, it's just like people's perception of what's possible now. It's just the norm, you know?
Yeah, and it doesn't make it more fun to have to go back 1,000 times.
No, I
or
mean-
something like that. And yes, we used to mix. You know, my first automation system was a series of different colored grease pencils, right? And what you do is you'd mark them on the faders, and you'd know from point to point, I had to get from here to here in this length of time. And then you'd have several people with you because you say, can you handle this at this point and move this and stuff like that.
And the fix was, did you get your part? Did you?
That's
get
right. It
your
was
part?
kind of a
Did you-
performance
Oh, okay,
thing.
let's
Do you know
do
what I
that.
mean? Or something. Or you would do what a lot of people did, which is you'd edit the mix together piece by piece, right? You do section by section, piece by piece, and edit it together, and that's it. So it doesn't necessarily make it more fun, but it isn't that different from my point of view. Do you know what I mean? Because we're still trying for the same thing. We might have a higher resolution. We might have more tries at it. It doesn't make it better, but it doesn't make it worse.
Totally, yeah.
That's the way I look at it. It's just different, man. You know, it's just different. You know, that's the thing. So,
All right.
Alfio,
Well, I guess I'm kind of in the middle of all of these guys. Because
and seated in the middle too.
yeah, I'm seated in the middle too. Yeah. No, because I did the traditional thing, and I came through the recording studios and did analog, and the first time I worked with Pro Tools, I kind of saw the writing on the wall, and I thought, I'd done a band over a weekend, and I couldn't believe how much work we got done, because we weren't working on tape. And I just thought, oh, this is where we're going. And then I was invited by a producer who's a songwriter at the time, and he invited me out to his place to record, essentially in his office, which was a really beautiful office downtown St. Catharines. But he, we went down there and we did some recording, and then I did a mix in the place, and I thought, in the box, and I thought, this doesn't sound brilliant, but it doesn't sound awful. And I'm wondering how many people would be able to tell the difference between what I've done here and what I would do on an SSL. And so I kind of thought, oh, okay, here's something going on. And then there was, these guys are right. There was a little bit of a lull in terms of like studios and places were shutting down. At the time, I was the head engineer at Iguana Recording, and I got kind of tired of it. And I thought, I got to get into doing other things. So I did education and got into that world. Now I come full circle. I'm back producing bands. The interesting thing is, the last two things that I've produced started out in studios. One at Noble Street, the other one over at Orange Lounge. We started with the drums, and then we migrated into basements. Still concentrating on front end, really good gear, really good microphones, but in a basement where you can just kind of hang out and drink coffee and record, and then I'm mixing the stuff at home. And the other thing that I find that's really interesting is that there's this whole other thing going on with bands right now, especially popular artists, where because they're out on the road, they're recording everything. And they're filming everything. And I've kind of tapped into this market where I'm mixing all this stuff. And it's interesting because I was just saying to Riley, working with the Arkells, I've only met one member of the band. Did a whole bunch of stuff with Lights, never met her.
Right.
Working with Greta Van Fleet, never met them. It's emails going back and forth. So there's this really strange thing going on where you're working with these artists, and in some cases with mixing, and you never meet them. And I'm finding that's kind of an interesting, change, which I don't even know if that would have been possible back in the day.
Yeah. I do admit that I miss the community. So I used to see the same people all the time.
Yeah.
Right? I'd see the same players. At the time, it was kind of, there was a heyday for a little while with the same, where you had what we called studio musicians. And these were guys who played live, but really not a lot, but they play on a lot of people's records. And it depends on the market. It's not going to happen in some markets and stuff like that. And I'd see them 2-3 times a week. Same people, I asked them how the kids are, you know what I mean, and that sort of thing. And it was a real sort of, that is something which I think the technology has not helped.
No.
No.
Industry too.
Yeah. However, there's a different kind of community that exists. There is an online community which and people feel real affinity for the people that they say they do, that they meet, and so they. But we used to do. I mean, at McClear. You did it way before I did, which was Avonlea, right? We used to do this.
I did that for 5 years.
That's right, and I did it for a couple. So it was the same band. It was like a small orchestra.
Small orc.
Live to 2-track.
Yeah.
Right, and we'd record
Actually,
them.
it was live to 2-track,
Yeah.
and that was with time code. It was the SSL 6000, so we
Yep.
actually did our stem mix.
Yeah, stems, that's
back
right.
to the multi-track.
Yeah.
So if we ever had to on
Yeah.
the soundstage,
And they never did.
do it. They never did.
They never
Just use
did,
the
yeah, that's right.
Track
Yeah,
stereo mix.
I did it for a few years.
But that's
And-
what I had in SSL because
Yeah.
you could do a total recall within about a half an hour, and
Yeah.
you're ready to, on the downbeat when the musicians were sitting down, the mics were all placed. You're recording.
Yeah, so I mean, and that was it. They were real musicians, and they'd come in, and we'd be in and out in 3 hours. That's the thing. It would be a short call and stuff like that. But what I missed was the people that I saw every week, and that's so
Yeah.
that community has changed, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's an interesting time. The other thing too is that just this whole idea of these artists reaching their fan base in different ways. You know, like doing things like bypassing this whole idea of, well, I got to make a record and I'm going to do this, and where they've got videos coming out on Vivo and they've got things coming out on YouTube, and it's just, I find it kind of fascinating. My job at that point, I feel, is to try and present whatever their live performance is or whatever it is that they send me in the best possible light, so that when you marry it up with picture and somebody sees it, it's as exciting as if you were sitting.
So do you fix it?
Yeah. What's that?
Do you fix it?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been known to change the odd thing.
Yeah. Well, I'm
You have to.
Yeah.
You have to. I mean, I can't.
There's a standard.
Yeah, there's a certain standard, and if I get files and something's gone wrong, you got to fix it. I mean, they're just expecting that, right?
And to be fair, some things that people think are live and raw and the way they are not always that way
Oh, yeah,
anyway.
absolutely.
Do you know what I mean? And that's classical music's a big one, not always, but the hundreds of edits in a classical recording, that's not a single performance. Let's just put that into it. I mean, it can be, but not an idealized, not a what they would call a studio classical record, which is doesn't mean they're not in a concert hall. It just means there's no audience.
Yeah, I try not to. Yeah. I try to leave it as the way it was recorded, but there's just certain things, I mean, things happen where somebody just
especially live, right? I mean,
something,
spur them
I
on.
want it to be generic too, to have that live feeling. So it's
Yeah. But it's interesting because I get the video, so I can watch the video as I'm mixing it. Yeah. And if I do an edit that doesn't feel quite right, you can tell immediately because you're watching it, right? So it's sort of an interesting thing, but.
I kind of it kind of hits on your point about records not being perfect. I hate when people send me things and expect things to get fixed, because for me that's a subjective choice. If something's not quite in time, or that's not necessarily wrong. So it actually bothers me when they're like, oh yeah, can you just swap out the drums or correct this time? And it's I much prefer if I'm not producing the record that someone deliver to me exactly how they want it to sound.
Right. Yeah.
And then I'll make it better.
Yeah.
Or, you know what I mean? Or try to. But you said, sometimes it's okay, this needs to be, fixed, but I really don't like that presumption which some people have. It's just oh yeah, no, the mixer will change the way this record sounds. It's well, no, it's not really the gig,
Right. No, you want to ask, well, isn't this what you meant?
Yeah, and then you're guessing what they want. You know what I mean? It's just weird.
Because then you're in the realm of infinite possibility.
Exactly. It's subjective.
Not a good place to be.
No, it's funny that you mentioned. I actually fired myself off a job.
Yeah.
Because of exactly that, and it was one of these things where there was all these guitars that were recorded, and the producer had said to me, these are kind of placeholders, but go through them all and figure out what it was that you.
Yeah, right.
Like, what?
I've had people be surprised too. They said, "Oh, you used that." I'm going, "Well, what did you expect? You gave it to me." Exactly. I'm sorry. Am I supposed to read your mind? I had no idea what you were thinking.
And then it becomes one of the infinite recalls, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, or I've had someone be like, "Oh yeah, I like how you muted this, part. It actually opens up a bit." I'm like, "You just didn't send me that file."
That's right. That's right.
That's right. I've had that happen.
Yeah. Roll with it. Oh yeah, I did that.
Yeah. It's you're welcome, I guess.
You didn't like that background vocal? What background vocal?
I do. I remember a live to 2-track record I did, one of my first records, and we were editing together takes, and I mistakenly edited a 5/4 bar in the middle of the thing. Do you know what I mean? Like it was on tape, right? And I was getting. That's how they play it now. Every time, it's now part of the chart.
Happy accident.
Just
Yeah,
happened.
accident.
It was a mistake. I screwed up, but now it's 5/4. That's it.
They love it.
All right. So many of you have come up through kind of the studio scene to some extent, and that sort of stuff. Now that it does exist, but it still feels a bit rarefied, doesn't it? It's like it's not entirely normal any longer, and that sort of. And to put it in perspective, I didn't, right? I started with my first studio out of school, pretty much, and it's still in existence. Inception Sound. That was my first studio. And I went from there to McClear, and I dropped in as the chief engineer at McClear because I had gone through I was 11 years into my gig at that point in time. I was looking for a bigger space, and so I dropped into there. And then I left after about 8 years there, seeing what you all saw, basically, and that sort of stuff like that. And I ended up at Phase 1, where I took a room that was my own. I just rented it for full time. It was a tiny little room, but we rented it for that. What? Yeah, Studio D. That was mine.
I like that room.
Yeah, I think I was the first tenant.
That was one of my favorite sounding rooms in there.
That's right. It's a small room. It's very well, nicely built. Really super cozy. Not a lot of clients can fit in. That's an excellent thing. And and I would spend my days there, my days and nights there, and that sort of thing. And I too, at some point, saw that recording budgets were dropping, but mixing budgets still seem to exist at that point in time, and that's also what I like to do. So the difference is that I didn't know any better, one way, or hadn't really seen anybody else work or anything like that. So most of what I ended up doing was just common knowledge or something like that, and kind of moving on. And for better or worse, it created a style, and that style some people liked. Some people didn't. What are you going to do? Do you know what I mean? And you hope that on balance they liked it, and that I went for it. So that's just. Alfio, you do some teaching now. I actually came out of school, if you can believe it. I was one of the first guys when I came to Toronto, 1980 something. I quickly learned I had a graduate degree from McGill University, and if I told anybody, they went, "Oh, you get the hell out of here. What are you talking about?" Do you know what I mean? And that's not the way you do it. So I stopped telling people. And then it didn't matter because I didn't get a job anyway. So they say, you guys were all employable. Apparently I wasn't. So I ended up getting in with somebody who already had a studio. I didn't start that studio. I joined that studio at one point. It was 1,000 square feet, the whole thing. Control room, studio, ISO booth, bathroom, lounge, the whole thing all together. And we had a rented 24-track, and then we sort of slowly went and we built it up until it was 2 24-track rooms and stuff like that. Then I went to McClear and all that stuff. So that path was somewhat different, but it was kind of the heyday of the recording studio to some extent, right? I mean, it wasn't the early part. All the tech was there. It was the heyday it was like towards the end of the analog era. So all the cool analog stuff was available. Right. And what stuff we started with digitally sucked, right? Unless it was an effect and stuff like that. And then the transition happens. It's just another thing. I think I was just lucky from timing. It's kind of like you say, timing makes a lot of your opportunities and stuff like that, and whether or not you go for it. So it's just a thought that whatever path one takes, I just wasn't ready to stop where I was or anything like that. So I just kept on going, and whatever for however that worked. And the other thing that I did, which is a little bit different, I think, not than you did, is that I came from kind of an instrumental background, and so the idea I had come through music school and all that sort of stuff like that. I played in orchestra and all that kind of stuff. So I liked orchestra stuff. And I saw the only place you could work with something that large was in film music. It was the last bastion of instrumental music as far as I was concerned. And that's it. The only place that had enough money And so I looked for that kind of work, and that kind of changed my perspective to some extent too. So that where you have, like you say, you have 50 or 60 or 70 people on the floor. Most of it I couldn't do here, which was interesting because it was declining at that time. Most of it was done in Los Angeles. But you'd have that sort of idea that if something went wrong, it cost a lot of money. It was in the realm of $700 to $1,000 a minute of time that was going by with all those players, right, and all that stuff. So yeah, that you'd only work in these fancy places and stuff like that.
150-minute overtime would have been 10 grand.
Yeah, that's right.
Somebody had to pay. Or
Yeah, that's right, and all that kind of stuff like that. So I think I was lucky too. That was kind of the heyday of that. One thing about the technology that I wonder about, you sort of talk about, and this whole idea of timing and and what's happening, because I find, being the age I am, that I have a certain idea of what's in time that doesn't seem to be the same as what other people think is in time. And I find it difficult, from my point of view, to mix something when I can't feel it in time. Does anybody else have that feeling? Like,
Yes.
yeah, that if it doesn't sit, I don't even know where to start.
Yeah.
I'll touch on something briefly with that, and it's happened way more than it should have in the last few months. But like, what's going on these days with alternative indie pop music? A lot of times you'll have real drums and you'll have programmed drums.
Yeah.
And what a lot of people don't check for, even the simplest thing, like say like somebody gives me, there's like 4 kick drums, 4 snare drums, and a live kit. And you look, and I just press play, it just sounds like gunshots all over. It's just like,
yeah.
and it's like, guy, you got to go through and like, you know what I mean? I can't even like listen to the song yet. You know what I mean? How did this come to me like this? Like, or even just like the phase relate. It sounds super thin, and all to do is flip the phase on a couple of the kick samples. There's the drum kit. Like and this goes back to the basics of like engineering 101. It's just like,
That is an engineering problem.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really defined.
And a production problem to a degree. Like the producers should be delivering the record produced. I don't think they should leave it too much up to the mixer. Like if they're gonna send me a reference, I want the stems or the session to come in exactly how that reference sounds. Because that's like, then I can see the vision. Because it's like, my pet peeve is when like zero out everything, and it's just like, okay, this doesn't sound like a record at all right now. And then you kind of have to reverse engineer something that they've spent months meticulously putting together.
Yeah.
It's like, like we're working backwards,
Yeah, and it's a kind of repair, really. You know what I mean? And that's the
And
thing.
people will tell me, like, do you want the effects? Do you want them dry or whatever? It's like, do you love the effects?
Yeah.
Because if you do, definitely send them to me so that I don't have to, recreate it kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But yeah, it's like, that's just a big part of that the gig of mixing is dealing with different, how you receive the records, and the delivery of it is going to change how that mix is going to go.
All right, I have just a quick story I'll tell about this. So Reef Martin, who, if you knew, was a very big producer, and I wish I could say it's me and I could lie, but it wasn't. It's actually one of my brothers who worked with him for a while. And what they used to do is they'd play the entire track to program drums. Everybody would play it, and they put the drums on last. And the concept being the drummer had to have enough to listen to know what to play, as opposed to, we traditionally, we sort of flip that around. But what they do, they were on tape, is they'd run a drum machine locked to tape. And the first thing they'd do is print a click. Then they'd print a quarter note kick drum. Then they'd measure the distance between the kick drum and the kick. Then they'd back up the program part till it lined up with the click. And then they do that for every instrument coming out of the drum. These were like, drum machines at the time for each one. And Arif's point was, if the drum machine's not in time, how's everybody else going to be in time? And then they'd use that to record everything to the drum, and then they'd throw it away, right? But they'd spend hours lining up the drum machine, right? With the concept that if it's not hip, it's just not going to be hip in the end. And that sort of stuff like that. So people know about this problem and timing. It seems to be a throwaway problem to a large extent, that if you just add stuff to something, you just take enough samples and stuff like that, it all works out. But it doesn't, as it turns out, right? The text, it doesn't even acoustically. Do you know what I mean? Like there are issues there, but at least it all happened at once, right? And that sort of stuff. So these issues of latency and generation of sound and stuff like that, they all seem to be something that I think needs looking at, you know what I mean, from that point of view. Okay, how are we doing for time here, folks? I have to look. Anybody know? Okay, we're almost up. I think, which I've been totally negligent on. Hey. Loads?
Yeah, like 20 minutes.
20 minutes. I think it's time for questions is what I'm thinking. Yeah, Michael. If that's okay. Anybody else got anything to say? They want to say their piece? Glenn?
Nope. I was just going to say, yeah, the recall thing. I was going to say, a good question for everybody, what would be the most ridiculous mix recall you've had to do? Because I can think of one.
Oh.
2 years after I finished a record, I had a call from a client. Said, hey, can you turn the bass line up on the whole record? I'm like, are you guys out of your fucking minds? I conveniently can't find the multi-tracks anymore.
I like the SSL. If you were an older SSL user, they used to have an insult switch.
Oh, yeah.
Right, that's it. And if you did I used to do as many wrong commands in a row as I could just to get an insult.
trigger.
Yeah, that's right. And if you did it allegedly had quarter dB resolution, something like that. And if you did the smallest move possible, and you'd put your name in, and it would say something like, that sounded great, Jeff.
Yeah.
It was just so sarcastic. And my favorite insult was, and you call yourself an engineer, you sniveling yeti.
Sniveling, yeah, it was a British.
Sniveling yeti. That's what it was. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
Very British.
So I went to Begbrook, which is where they make the SSLs.
You used to get the castle from Big Bird
Yeah,
every once in a while.
and yeah, that's right.
Oh, yeah.
And I went to I went there, and they were trying to sell something, and they took me over there, and I got the distinct impression I could have asked for anything at that point in time. But I noticed in the latest software update that there were no more insults, and so they were touring me around the place, and they said, "Here's our engineers, software engineers." And I said, what happened to my insults? And he says, oh, no, we didn't have room for them. And I looked, I said, you're talking about a few bytes of data. That ain't going to happen here. So he takes me outside, and he says, so I can't tell you who it was, but we had this big important session in New York, and the console blew up, which it would do occasionally, and it blew out all their mixes. And it just spit out insult after insult after insult after insult. And they said, yeah, we took them out after that. I don't know if it's true, but it was a good story, right? Nothing else. Okay, so if there are any questions, if anybody for any of this august panel, I think now would be a good moment. Ooh, don't be shy.
Just check.
Is it?
Thank you. From the educational perspective, just wondering about what the focus should be for students moving forward. Should we still be learning on analog consoles? Just wanted to hear everybody's thought on that.
Okay, full disclosure, this is a former student of mine.
Well, I can speak on that a little bit.
Please do.
Analog roots are still going to be
Yeah.
there regardless.
All the plugins are modeled after analog things.
Yeah, so to know where it came from, I think is essential for going forward, basically.
Yeah,
Digital's come such a long way. It
Yeah.
sounds fabulous.
yeah.
I'm really from the early analog days where people say, would you want to go back and record that way? And I go, hell no. Because you don't want to spend 3 hours lining up the machine, whether you're biasing it for Scotch, Ampex, or whatever, and then making sure you do a test run, top, middle, and bottom of 10K to make sure it holds its high frequency, to make sure just that your storage medium is going to sound like what you're putting on it and come back. And those were pain in the ass days. I mean, one quick little thing about the whole thing about $10,000 for an overtime segment that actually happened to me.
Yeah.
And it was because when we used to tone back in the days, we used to tone the top and the tail. And
Beginning and end.
yeah, beginning and end, so that, and we'd screen every reel. So I'd have like 6 or 7 or 8 reels for this film score, all set up, all done. And a lot of times when you're doing these cues, if they're like 10 seconds long or 15 seconds long, little radio cues or something, you don't really listen to every one of them.
Right.
Because you're on the clock, you're doing whatever. Well, first day the orchestra had left and everything, and we started going back and just checking things. Found out in the middle of the roll of one of these tapes, there was no emulsion, there was no magnetic, there was nothing.
There was no tape
And I lost
on that tape.
Yeah, just backing, and I lost a whole bunch, and I went, oh.
Oh, man.
So, I mean, the orchestra, everyone agreed that they would just redo those cues for me.
Right.
Which
Oh.
was great, because it was back then everybody realized, and it was
Right.
unforeseen. But from that day on, we checked every roll because
Right.
it just wasn't working. So back to your thing about analog, it trains your ears to listen to things. So, you know, if it's good analog gear, then it'll give you the best rendition of what to train your ears for. Okay? But digital is king as far as I'm concerned.
I'd like to say that recording is analog all the way up to the converter.
Yeah.
There really isn't any much of a change there, right? I mean, you still have air pressure changes that need to be turned into electricity somehow, especially acoustically. And unless the gizmo you have puts out a digital signal, it's still the same as it ever was, really.
Yeah.
That really hasn't changed. Whether it's in a console or it's in a rack or it's just a bunch of wire,
Well,
it's still the
I
same.
look at it kind of like signal flow.
Well, that's true.
And you're teaching signal flow, so I think there's a certain amount of validity in teaching somebody on an analog console.
So where you teach, there are analog consoles.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. It's the same thing where we have an analog consoles for that express purpose, that it's easy to see where things are going than it is
Yeah.
to imagine it.
Yeah, from an educational point of view, it makes sense because you can kind of follow it, you can point it out. But the thing is, once you get into Pro Tools or whatever DAW you're using, there's still signal flow, really, when you think about it. Right? So if you understand it in one end, you're going to understand it even better in the other end, right?
It's nice to see the physical thing. It's easier to see. It's easier to. I do believe it's easier to understand it physically and then take the make believe. You know what I mean? The because I mean we choose to look at it digitally, like or the workstations choose to make it look like a console, but there isn't really a good reason for that. If you think about it from a programming point of view, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But it does for us, and that's because we understand that. You know what I mean? And that sort of stuff.
I think for me, like as a, you know, when I get called to engineer a session for a band or something like that, or we're doing drums or whatever we're doing, having a console for me, it's like I would rather, you know, given the choice of going to a cheaper studio to make more money or going to a really nice studio that has a console, I'd rather take a hit on how much money I'm getting to have the console, have the experience of having an assistant there and the interns and, you know, the coffee running, but having the console when you're set, like if you have a band and you have people in different booths and stuff like that, it's like the top, like just having a tactile surface in front of you with all your preamps, all your sends. I can combine different guitar mics to one track. I got a reverb going that I can, you know, it's just so like efficient. Like I've had experiences working just with Pro Tools in a band in the other room, and it's like a nightmare for me. But going back to mixing, I love it. But you know, the whole thing of just, I just find it's just more personable with what you're doing, and it's more like an art form when you have the console to record. So like for an educational purpose, I think it's very important to still teach on consoles because they're in every single studio, regardless if they're getting used on that day or not. They're still there, and if you want to get a job at a studio as an assistant, as an intern, you kind of got to have that knowledge, because if you don't, you know, somebody else will, and you just won't, you know, get the job.
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
There's one back there. While the microphone's going back to Anthony,
Yeah.
let me just pitch in on that they just to double down on this idea of teaching analog because of signal flow and troubleshooting. All of our tools are abstractions of the things that they were once as physical constructions, and it's hard enough for a kid learning. You know, when everything's just a mouse click away and nothing is hard, it's tough enough to teach simple signal flow. But the more complicated and dense things get, it's a nearly impossible task. And I think it's only a matter of time before, well, in fact, there's a display on the other side of this curtain that, you know, you're right, there's no reason why it needs to look like an old analog console, and increasingly they're not going to. And as soon as you lose that physical metaphor in the interface, I think we're going to make things even tougher for young people coming in.
For comprehension, I think. That's right.
For comprehension and just understanding how to.
I think
follow
if you already
from point
know,
A to
you're
point B.
fine. If you don't, it may be. And that's interesting. I wonder how people will figure it out. You know?
My question is about how has the video camera changed how you record? I know a lot of sessions now, you're looking for multi-platform delivery as of everything, and the YouTube video is absolutely the most important thing for some artists. And now that we have, at the studio we were at, Revolution, we had a camera crew light through pane a window, and it smashed the window because it overheated. Right. How has the camera changed how you record things and influenced your deliverables?
Well, Glenn.
Yeah, completely changed my entire life, honestly. I went from doing, you know, I don't know, 4 to 10 projects a year with local indie bands to doing maybe 1 or 2, and all the rest is basically gear demos and tutorials, that kind of thing. And the camera's constantly there. And if I've got a band in, now it's basically, oh, well, let's throw a camera up, let's get you guys doing your thing. We'll throw that up as well. Maybe we can integrate a tutorial into that kind of thing. Right. So that's how it's worked for me, and it's been a huge benefit.
Sort of an example, this isn't in studio, but I years ago I did something, it was a live show that they did a whole number of nights, and it was in a custom-built environment, like it was in a kind of Cirque du Soleil built the tent that this whole thing was in. And they wanted to shoot it, and the show ran to time code. So there was a live band, but there was a lot of pre-recorded stuff, and there was a lot of lighting cues. Everything was done to time code. So they took one camera, and they put it in a different spot for 70 nights, and ended up with 70 different angles to cut the thing from. So if you're doing something that's programmed, that has a time base, my recommendation is take that camera and move it around, because in theory it'll you know, you have the ability here to create a great deal of stuff. It doesn't need to be, even that doesn't really need to be real time, even in the studio situation, and we can kind of overdub that in a way, and it works amazingly. I thought it was super clever how they did it. So there you go. Yeah. Jim. Oh, stereo. 2 mics.
We had a session with people who called themselves mixers, and I'm not quite sure what that distinction is, a couple of years ago. And after as people were discussing back and forth, what struck me was it had become sort of like the early days of synthesizers. Now, do you remember the early days when you went out and bought patch books on how to patch the various ways around a synthesizer to get different sounds? And it seemed to me that they were basically now doing it digitally, because the question was, well, do you put that effect before that effect, or does it have to go on a side channel? And
right, the paradigm is that.
Like, you know, so like the secret sauce is now would have been a patch book. Right.
Anyway. Or what are those cheat codes you can get for video games? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Anyway, just.
He says like the preset before presets, kind of. Like,
yeah, and now presets are a big thing, and we do see in you know, the kind of signature plugin series like that Waves has gone for, which is essentially a bunch of processes in a row put where you know what I mean, where they're kind of giving you a pre-patch.
Really?
I love the CLA bass. I'm a sucker for the CLA bass.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And sadly, some of them are good, but or something, and you're sort of semi-embarrassed to use them, right? I mean, like you said, you know, because you don't have to. But by the way, presets are these days just about every bit of software. You know, plugins come with a whack of presets, and in fact, you know, it's really a good place to start. You know, the trouble is getting a descriptive name. If they're like IKEA names, it's kind of hard to know what they mean. But you know, it's not a bad place to start.
I think everyone here probably has got their own plugins that they've modified and then put their own little initial.
Yeah, you have presets and stuff like that.
I mean, I've got several. My go-tos that I just plug in, especially for post and stuff like that, for cleaning things up and whatever. You just plug them in, and then you react to what that signal is. You know, and modify it.
Presets confuse me though, because it's like snare one. It's like, okay, well, what snare is
that's
this for?
The problem.
Is it
that's
a very dull snare, or is this my ears off?
It's the
like,
names
where
that. That's right.
Yeah,
that's very difficult.
I don't really know. How
Reverb
much
presets though, I can sit there for hours just keep going through reverb. Like
right.
on a reverb plugin, I don't know.
That's right. And
But everything else is kind of weird. Yeah, like on SSL, like kick. It's just like it never. I've tried them and it never works out. Like I don't know.
yeah, that's right. No, there are some things like that. I used to have so my first console had two things which, you talk about like what's the secret to them. The favorite thing, we used to do our own maintenance on the consoles and stuff, and it had the mystery resistor, I called it, because it was at the end of a circuit path and it was a resistor hooked up at one end. And I could never figure it out, but I was always afraid to take it out, right? Because I had no idea what it did. It sort of connected to the spirit world or something like that. I had, well, that's what I mean. I didn't want to take it out, right? Because I was just. We also, I will say this, and it was a terrible thing we used to do. We had a good button. This was a big red button that did absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
And it was just about the power of suggestion, right? People would say, hey, can you make that sound a little better? And we were at our wits' end. We'd push the button. Yeah, exactly.
Anthony, who just asked a question, on his Warbeck, he had a suck button.
A suck button,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's the opposite way.
I know what cartoon that's from, by the way. Doug's Last Day with the Band, right? That's the cartoon it's from. It's from the producers not yet. They used to call that stuff like that. Well, that's the problem. I have this theory about mistakes. Is that when you come back, people are playing, there's some kind of take, and they come back in and they listen and they go, oh, wait, there was something there. And then you play for them again and they go, oh, no, that's fine. And my theory is they were right the first time because it's tension and release, right? That's the problem. The second time they expected the mistake, it happened, that releases it. And it's a good thing, but they were actually right the first time, and that's it. So first impressions, I find, are often really, really, really important, and which leads to the whole concept of perspective and why I have so many speakers, basically. So there, I've taken it around, I've solved my problem, we're all good. Okay, okay. Any other questions? Sure.
Just to be an anarchist from the sound reinforcement side of the chain, Mr. Noonan has been very vigilant on educating all you guys to pay attention to all the new formats that you're going to have to put product out in. And most of you guys, unless you were starving for a gig, would do live sound. But are you guys producing product now, appreciating that there's a whole different way that it's going out in the final venues and live reinforcement? Clubs have disappeared, so that's a changing landscape. Completely hacked bands that you didn't know a year ago are out touring with $1 million PA systems because there's so much stuff out there. We're going to get into the live immersion part of it. Are you guys to the point of creating your product, paying more attention to what happens in the live performance stage and awards and stuff like that? Or have you guys still stayed focused on someone's going to sit in their living room and listen to this?
Okay, I'm going to answer this first, if you don't mind, guys. I've discovered that the world is mono. Never mind immersion audio. I see more, and I literally, I poll this. I see more people, one, listening off their actual phones, and more to the point, wireless speakers. So home systems, I know people are investing heavily in their home systems, saying, man, I got music in every room, it's all the same and stuff like that, and it's in glorious mono. Yeah. Right? So I think on that level, we do pay attention to the delivery, and a lot of PA is mono, really. That's what happens with That's always been an issue for me. It's more an issue than it was before, and I've got an Atmos system at my place. So you know what I mean? It's like it's fascinating to me that's so. Yes, we do pay attention in general to where things are played. I mean, maybe you guys have a different, listening on different speakers. For me, is that sort of a thing. Listening on headphones or whatever you do and stuff. So it's a question of delivery. Like what our delivery is. When I mix for television, I mix at TV level. When I mix for film, I mix at film level. I've got my room is more or less THX specific and all that sort of stuff like that. So yeah, it's a big deal. It's a big deal, yeah.
Me personally, I mean, 80% of my work now is all in post.
Yeah.
For television, for film, for whatever else. So I've got to be aware of all kinds of live applications too, because, I mean, it could be as crazy as a Dr. Ho commercial, but it's going to be on television. It's going to be played in demonstrations. It's going to be whatever. So, yeah, different monitoring systems to make sure that it works. Yeah. Sometimes a whole bunch of different mixes. Starting with 5.1, 5.1.2, whatever you're starting with, and then all the down mixes, so that you do your first up mix, and then you do your down mixes for all the mediums.
Yeah, print mastering is a big deal.
Yeah.
With this sort of thing.
For me personally, when I'm mixing, I mean, obviously I'm checking on different speakers and stuff like that, but I work with so many different genres. Like when I'm sitting where somebody gives me something to mix, I'm just worried about the song. I just want the song to translate. So, you know, whether that means like there is a lot of bass and it's kind of flubby, I mean, whatever works for the song. But besides that, we'll touch on the thing with the live thing. What's happening now, and it's getting really crazy, is the live stem thing. When you're done doing a mix, and you got to export 96 tracks because, you know, the musical director wants to, you know, have every single element because they want it to sound like the record, which, you know, I do have a respect for that. Like you go see a band, especially if it's like a pop artist, and there is a lot of, you know, track playing back with the live instruments that they want to have it sound like the record. But what's happening nowadays is just people are kind of expecting that. That it's kind of the norm that they get the live stems at the end of the mix.
It's a bit of work.
It's a lot of work.
It's a bit of work. Often
I'm lucky I have
just
a guy.
Expected.
I'm lucky I have a guy working for me now who does it all for me when it's all done. But yeah, it's just become the norm now. And you know, a few years ago, you know, when I was learning under a couple people, it wasn't really a thing. Like you would just give people mixes, and if they want the live thing, you had to come back to the studio, book time. But now, you know, everybody's mixing in the box. It's they kind of just expect it, right? But
years ago, I helped Rush prep a tour, and you know the same thing, just 3 guys, but there's a million parts going on.
Oh yeah.
And they had tech under the stage, and they'd keep Getty would keep a pedal board, and he'd trigger things from the pedal board, and you know they would all, and but they didn't play to click, they didn't play to track at all and stuff like that. So I asked him one day, I said, "So Getty, you're playing the tune, you click something in, how do you know it's going to be in time?" And he said, at the point, it's 35 years of playing together. You don't think we know what the tempo is? And I thought that was very interesting. So, I mean, people say they have perfect pitch, but you have rhythm memory, too, to some extent. And, of course, he could re-trigger. That was the whole point. Yeah, they got, that sort of thing. So it's kind of impressive, really. All right, any other questions? Sure.
Time for one more.
Yeah.
I just wanted to pick up on a comment that you'd made, Glenn, earlier on. I think you've been alluding to, and that is that a lot of the mixing that's happening now are assembled mixes. Stuff is coming from various sources. Musicians, maybe the level of musicianship's not as high as it once was because we're not required to play together. I'm just referencing Doug McClement, who would have been here with us, but is just finishing up recording Jim Cuddy this week, live in a barn with his remote at the back, with no click track and no machines. And that's I mean, I'm not going to say that either way of recording is wrong or valid, but the fact that we have identified that music is becoming a little bit more fractured, are we part of the problem? The fact that we allow or enable that to happen, encourage it, develop all the plugins, become more willing to assemble mixes where the violinist is in Italy and we never ever meet them. And as you were alluding to, Jeff, the sense of community is lost. That has to have an impact on the musicality, I think. Do you think we're part of the problem because we're willing to do that? We're being driven that way? Or what's going on?
You want an honest answer? Like, are you guys going to hate me if I answer this honestly? Of course we're part of the problem. You know, we're the ones willing to say, okay, you know what, good enough. We're not saying, you know, I can't speak for anybody else here, but personally, I threw auto-tune out of my studio 8 years ago. I haven't looked back. If a client comes to me and says, hey, can you fix that? I said, no, go sing it again. Yeah. It all depends on what you want to do. If you know, you just draw a line in the sand and say, no, I'm not going to do it that way.
Conversely, I don't even see it as a problem, right?
Okay.
So,
I don't either. I think it's a product of budget in this day and age. I mean, if you want to use some of the best players in the world, you know, last couple of albums I did, I had Robert Platt play, you know, harmonica. I had Joel Feeney do all the vocals.
Yep.
All these guys have their own studios, and it's like a network. You're talking to them anyways. You're not in the same place and space and time, but I would send this stuff to them. They'd send me all their stems. I'd put it in, and it was actually fabulous, and we probably saved a lot of money because just transportation with these people, booking a studio, doing whatever. So it's a way of evolving that I think it doesn't hurt it, because when I use these people, I'm using the people for what I want, you know, and I'm getting what I want. And if not, I make a phone call and say, I need something else, and then it's immediately sent back to me.
I think it's kind of a pessimistic perspective, like, because we're in it, like, we look back on the glory days and remember all the great and classic things from it, but there's shit music in the 70s also, you know what I mean? So it's like,
It just
it's
was
like-
hard.
They couldn't afford to be in the big studio.
That's
right,
That was,
yeah, and it's like, there's a lot of,
was out.
right, yeah, and there's great musicians playing in studios today, and there's great records being made, and there are also shit ones, and there always has been, there always will be. You know, how you make shit records may change, and how you make great records may change, but I don't think, you know, like we're saying, either way is right or wrong. And, you know, if that means throwing an auto-tune, if that gets a better record or a better sound, then that's cool.
Well, yeah, exactly. I think we're more or less done here? Okay, so I'm going to bring it back to what I said at the beginning. Technology changes the music to some extent. You may not like it, that's very true, but it's going to happen. It's going to happen, and I don't think it's a bad thing. You might not like it if you're format specific or like genre specific or something, that you may absolutely be right. Maybe the technology doesn't help it at all. But for the evolution of music, I have no idea whether I think there's no way to judge whether it's good or bad. I think that's just your perspective.
The end
you know what I mean?
product
At
of
that
what you
point
put out, that's the judgment.
I think people won't become worse for it, but they'll be different. That's for sure. Okay. We're done. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
A fantastic kickoff. I think it's absolutely clear that a huge number of people in our industry are not so secretly jealous of the fact that you're all able to make a living at music, because I know a lot of people would love to be doing that.
Yeah, I've still got a day job.
This was a fantastic and very singular way to start the 2 days, because I think for most of us, it's fair to say that a love of music intrinsically is what ultimately sort of dragged us into this. So thank you very much. It was fantastic.